Right, all you glorious gamers out there, welcome to the PlayerStoo Podcast, the video game podcast for gamers like you, by gamers like you. You can find PlayerStoo on all the social media, that is Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com, that's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, that really helps us out. It does a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And while you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, again, that just helps us out even more, and you would be an absolute legend to us. Alright, and on with the show. My name is Mark Henderson. With me, as always, Mr. Lewis Camley. How's it going, Lewis?
It's going very well, Mark. How are you getting on yourself?
Not bad. Very much ready to talk about some video games. Rubbish week at work. This is like therapy. This is good. Ready to talk about video games.
I'm not a paid therapist, man. I'm just the guy.
Do you know what, Liz? You're good enough for me.
I'll take that.
That's as big a compliment as you're getting. Anyway, man, what have you been playing this week?
Oh, take 2 guesses, Mark.
Is it Elden Ring? Is it Elden Ring? This is going to be Elden Ring until Christmas.
It's just more Elden Ring. To be honest, I haven't been playing a great deal this week. I had quite a busy social weekend as, you know, we continue to pretend that COVID is over and go back to our old lives, but a nice time all the same. I don't have tons more to add to what I've been saying up till now. The game continues to be really fantastic. I've been exploring a bit more than I had before. I found some really great weapons. I've been thinking a bit more about my character build and like where I put my runes in terms of upgrades and nice. Kind of going through
getting
that
into the thick of it sort of thing.
Yeah, like I've still not really looked up build guides and that kind of thing to get really deep into the meta of it all. I've just kind of been looking for stuff that is near the kind of part of the game that I'm at and that I could use with the kind of stats that I've started the game with. So nothing too substantial, but yeah, I'm kind of slowly finding my way out from the starting point and finding stuff in a sort of radius that is increasing bit by bit, and I'm getting more and more to grips with the combat, which is the one thing that I feel like that has slowed me down a wee bit in comparison to, you know, how I don't want to even say that I clicked quickly with Bloodborne, but I think with Bloodborne I came to understand kind of what I was supposed to be doing a little bit faster than I have with this.
You need to remember though, you had 3 or 4 false starts with Bloodborne, and this is a totally new system, and I honestly think half the battle with Souls games is just getting that understanding of the mechanics, because it demands you have a high understanding of the mechanics, you know?
Absolutely.
So I think that makes a lot of sense, man.
Yeah, it's absolutely that, and it's largely because this introduces a slightly more defensive potential. It's not even a defensive necessity, because you don't have to use a shield and you don't have to play like that. I found out that some of my friends who are playing it are actually dual wielding instead of using a sword and shield or a weapon and shield, and that's kind of made me think, oh, maybe I can play it slightly more aggressively, which is closer to Bloodborne and closer to kind of how I liked to play that. So as you can probably tell from everything I've said here, I'm still in the experimental phase of Elden Ring. I'm still kind of getting to grips with it and working my way into it, so expect plenty more as I said last week, and will potentially say for weeks to come. But yeah, still loving it, really enjoying it.
Nice one, man, nice one.
And what have you been playing, Mark?
Well, you can guess what I've been playing as well, can't you, really?
More Horizon, perchance.
It is more Horizon, Lewis. It is more Horizon. Honestly, I don't have too much to add either. Like you, I had a sort of different weekend to what I was expecting to have, and therefore couldn't play quite as many games as I was expecting to, unfortunately. I was sort of hoping to really fire through to the end of Horizon, but alas, I've not been able to do so. One thing I would just like to say about the game, I suppose, is that I really think around the discourse of this game, the combat really gets overshadowed. And it's such a shame, because it is really fantastic. It strikes such a good balance between like really being tough enough and challenging enough to make you like actively try in every major battle that you're in. However, it is also easy enough and forgiving enough, I suppose, that you rarely outright die, but you will often have quite seriously depleted resources after a substantial battle, you know what I mean, particularly healing resources and things like that. And it's just massively enjoyable to play. Like, I would highly recommend anyone who has a PlayStation go and buy Horizon. It's an absolutely fantastic game, and it is probably one of the best open world games I've played in a long time in reality.
Nice one, yeah. I mean, I guess that's sort of exactly what you were hoping it was going to be before it dropped. I think those points about the combat, though, like the only real discussion I've heard about the combat in the game, other than people going, oh yeah, it's great, is kind of around the melee combat being slightly better than it was in the first game, which from the little I've played of the first game, I remember not thinking that melee was really an option at all. So is that something that you found? Is it adding more elements this time?
I think the melee combat probably is slightly better, but it's not something you gravitate towards.
No,
I mean, it's largely your bow, it's largely like throwing spears and things like that. It's those kind of weapons. Your melee stuff is usually kept for like up close combat, which in 90% of situations you're trying to avoid. You know what I mean? You're trying to be stealthy, you're trying to pick people off from far away, that sort of thing. But if you do get close, there is a far deeper system there ready for you. I suppose you can choose to play it that way. Maybe that's just me, maybe that's just not the way I'm choosing to play the game here, you know? But there is a much deeper melee system now. Like melee has its own skill tree and all that now. I can't really remember if it had its own in the first game as well, but it feels much more substantial, weighty. You can do a lot more things. There's more combos and things like that you can do. So yeah, that definitely is an added element to it. It's not necessarily one I'm massively interacting with, but if you chose to play the game that way, it is definitely there, you know? Anyway, Lewis, I think that we have to move on to the news because there is so many things we need to talk about. Alright, Lewis, news item number 1. After weeks of rumours and speculation, PlayStation have finally announced their Games Pass competitor, which was codenamed Project Spartacus. In actuality, it is basically just a rebranding of the PlayStation Plus and PlayStation Now services, effectively rolling them into one combined service with multiple tiers. The tiers are threefold. Firstly, there is the PlayStation Plus Essentials tier, which is basically just your PlayStation Plus subscription as you know it now, with monthly downloadable games, exclusive discounts, cloud storage, online multiplayer, and the price will remain unchanged, at least here in the UK. So far as I can tell, it's $6.99 a month, $19.99 a quarter, and $49.99 for the year. Now, the second tier is where things get substantially more interesting. The second tier is called PlayStation Plus Extra, and in this tier you get everything from the Essential tier, plus an added catalogue of up to 400 PlayStation and PlayStation 5 games, including PS Studios blockbusters. So this is basically your Games Pass tier. The games will also be downloadable and be able to be played locally. However, there is no mention of PlayStation Studios games or even third-party games being available day one, which we will come on to talk about at length later, I will bet on. The price here is $10.99 a month, $31.99 a quarter, or $83.99 a year, which makes it the same monthly price as paying for Games Pass Ultimate, but if you pay quarterly, or especially if you pay yearly, is substantially cheaper than Ultimate and even the entry-level Games Pass plan. Finally, the third tier is called PlayStation Premium and includes everything from the Essentials and Extra tiers, plus you get 360 additional games, including classics from the PS1, 2, 3 and PSP consoles. This tier allows you to stream any game, including the PlayStation 4 games, on any tier. However, the PS3 games will only be available to be streamed. You cannot download them and play them locally, which is unfortunate, but if you know anything about that console and how it was designed, it kind of makes sense, but is nonetheless unfortunate. At this tier, you will also be given access to timed limited trials so that you can try games before you buy them. It is unclear if that will be available on all games on the PlayStation Store or if it will only be available for the games that sign up for it, effectively. The pricing here is $13.49 monthly, $39.99 quarterly and $19.99 yearly, which if paid monthly and quarterly is more expensive than Games Pass Ultimate. But again, if you pay yearly, it's actually still quite a chunk cheaper than Games Pass Ultimate. It's nearly £32 cheaper on the year, which is not an unsubstantial amount considering the amount you're paying on total, you know? I suppose the main thing to talk about here, really, Lewis, is those games coming on day one, or those games not coming on day one, I suppose this is the actual talking point. There was no mention in the release, and Jim Ryan has subsequently come out and said that it will not be part of their plan. It's not part of their business model to put their day one exclusives onto their subscription service. Do you think that this will massively affect the success of this plan?
I don't think it will massively affect the success of this plan, but I do think it will have an impact on the potential growth of their membership. Because in a lot of ways, this doesn't add a great deal that people might not have kind of been expecting or think that is merited as part of a package like this anyway. And when you draw direct comparisons to Xbox Game Pass, there is an absence, right? There's no two ways about it. It is something that the competitor is offering for their biggest games that PlayStation is not. However, we know that PlayStation Plus has something like, I think, 40 odd million subscribers, 45 million subscribers at the moment. PlayStation Now has maybe another 5 million, or I have absolutely no idea where their numbers are at the moment, to be honest, for PS Now. But you bring those together, and I think that middle tier in particular is the one that will actually drive people to spend a wee bit more than they already are to get access to a big pool of games. Now, I think I've said before that in a lot of ways what I would have hoped for as at least the baseline of a PlayStation subscription service would be an enhanced version of the PS Plus collection that we have on PlayStation 5. I think that middle tier kind of offers that, and then some of the stuff that is offered by the third tier, the highest tier, is great for your total diehards, but I don't know that too many people really are going to go and spend that kind of money unless they're, really serious gamers. So
it's more about the classic games at that point, right? If you're a retro gamer, you're into playing those old titles, that tier makes sense for you. Otherwise, you're probably fine on the middle tier, to be honest. I think that will be the biggest selling tier in reality,
Yeah, I think so. If not just the basic tier itself, because a lot of people will just look at this and go, I'm kind of fine with what I get from PS Plus. And I think it all does throw up a lot of different questions. To me, for one, if we're still to get our monthly 2 games, no matter what tier you're on, are those games not already part of the big library of, 400 games or whatever that they're saying are available to us? And does that mean that those games are always going to be older games then? Or how is that going to work? Will they remain permanently in the collection after they've been given to you in a specific month?
That's a great question, but I would strongly suspect that those games go the way that they did on Xbox, and that they become
pretty obsolete,
very much smaller titles, very much titles that aren't a big deal, basically. Sure. So I can see you going in that direction personally.
I think you're probably right about that, but that then means that the Essentials tier, which is kind of the olive branch that they've offered to people who don't or can't spend more money, actually in real terms becomes slightly less valuable than it currently is. I guess, we could talk about this in all sorts of different directions, but ultimately it all comes down to what those libraries of games are, 400-ish PS4 and PS5 games. And well, hopefully that is the absolute cream of the crop and you're getting a lot of options there. I really hope, like Game Pass, we see a lot of indies come to the service, because even the PS Plus collection as it currently stands doesn't have a lot of that type of stuff. I noticed one news story that we're not covering this week is that a new trademark for Knack was filed this week, and that made me think, well, is that just that they're going to give us Knack? And this, they're just
it's just the renewing.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't mean anything.
Just renewing old trademarks. So, but not of particularly exciting stuff. So it remains to be seen. But it's good that we finally have this. I don't think there's many surprises, and it is more or less what we were told by a lot of the leaks. We'd be
it's
getting.
Nearly identical to the leaks. To the point that I think it might be identical to the leaks. Yeah, I suppose the second biggest talking point here is really the amount of games that PlayStation are giving you access to. At the top tier, you get up to 760 games. That includes the backwards compatible games and the games that you'll get at PS4 and PS5. That is way more than Games Pass are currently giving you. Now, don't get me wrong, I would much rather have fewer, higher quality games on a service like this. I'm 100% in that camp. Yeah. However, right now, including EA Play games and their backwards compatible games, Xbox Games Pass Ultimate offers around 460 to 470 games as of right now, as of this recording. It was weirdly difficult to find a specific number on that list, I've got to say, but it's around that sort of mark. So, it's a significantly bigger pool of games, but as you rightly said, the quality of those games is going to matter enormously here. I hope that they are of a quality similar to Games Pass, because ultimately I think that this is actually a pretty good deal. It's pretty good value for money in general. I don't think it's as good value for money as Xbox Games Pass, which is sort of the problem, right? Xbox Games Pass is such a ludicrously good deal that it makes everything else look bad by comparison. But in actual fact, I think that this is actually probably a pretty good deal. I think that this is pretty competitively priced, really, especially if you're paying yearly. If you can afford to drop that yearly price on it, then then I really think that it is very competitive indeed. And before Games Pass came along, I was very much used to paying my PS subscription as a yearly lump sum, and I'm sure a lot of people were as well. I think it becomes very competitive there. So yeah, I think that Games Pass is still very much on top of the pile here. But nonetheless, I think this is a really good offering from PlayStation, really. And I do like the fact that they are offering a lot of their classic games, which is one of the huge drawbacks, really, from PS5 versus the Series X, was the level of backwards compatibility that Xbox offered. Yeah. And also from a gaming preservation point of view, I just think that it's a good thing that these games are still available for people to play, because we're seeing more and more of these stores just disappear and thousands of games are lost forever.
Yeah, absolutely. So. But I mean, I guess on that point, just really quickly, like, I mean, they could shut down the service or take games away from it, and it's still a bit frustrating that they are now saying to us that classic PS1 and PS2 games are available to download, but you can't just go and buy them individually.
Well, yeah, that is annoying. And
definitely. That is something that Xbox do offer as well. So in some ways they've kind of shown their hand a bit here, that what they're interested in is repeated subscription money and not so much in the kind of better consumer things of just giving you access to everything, all the options that could be on the table. So again, we'll see what games that involves. It would be amazing if they then did add them all to the PlayStation Store, and then you could choose what you want to do. But a lot of different ways to cut this announcement, I think. Some great and some, I mean, I think even on that, it's a ready-made library. That is amazing. For anyone buying a new console, you've got a ready-made library here, which is what Xbox have been offering for a long time. So that's fantastic.
All right, Lewis, news item number 2. Coming on to Games Pass now. There have been a few pieces of information coming out around Games Pass in the last week as well. This was all pre the PlayStation announcement, just for reference. Firstly, I want to talk about comments made by David Gibson, who's been covering Square Enix for over 15 years as an industry analyst. He estimates that it cost Xbox between 10 and 15 million to get Guardians of the Galaxy on Games Pass, and that wasn't even a day one game, and they're still spending that amount of money on it, which I suppose just shows the amount of money that is getting banded around here to get these big games onto these subscription services, you know, although it might not be as good for publishers and devs as you might think, which again we'll come on to later. I'll get Lewis to read David Gibson's Twitter thread that he made, just for reference as well. This was when it was leaked that PlayStation would be making an announcement in the coming weeks, but they hadn't yet made the announcement, so he's sort of talking about Project Spartacus before we knew for certain what it was going to be. But he makes a couple of really interesting points, I think, about Games Pass in this Twitter thread, but I'll let Lewis read and then we can come back to it.
Yeah, so he says, Project Spartacus is combining PlayStation Plus and Now with tiered pricing. As expected, new releases will not get same-day access to first-party titles. But I expect it to be like theatres/pay, where there is a limited window in theatres before going to the subscription pay service. New games still need to be bought by users when released, or wait and get to subscription 3 months plus later. So Project Spartacus is not going head-to-head with Game Pass, but still offering a compelling service. That should keep its own studios and third-party studios happy. So Netflix of games is still a while away. Keep in mind that Microsoft paid about $5 to $10 million for Guardians of the Galaxy to be on Game Pass. That is like $2 per game when retail is $29. Okay, that is all profit, but not too many publishers will be doing that given the low economics from Game Pass. For all those who wonder where these numbers come from, I've been covering Square Enix as an analyst for 15 years and talk to them regularly. Terms of an Xbox agreement are confidential, but these are my estimates based in discussions with Square and others.
So I think it's interesting what he said about first and third party studios being happy not having their games on a subscription service day one. And I think that it's very interesting that he described Games Pass as quote unquote low economics for the publishers. To add to that, as of today's announcement from PlayStation CEO Jim Ryan has also made very similar comments in an interview with GamesIndustry.biz regarding putting first party games on the new subscription service day one. He made this statement to GamesIndustry.biz.
We feel like we're in a good virtuous cycle with the studios, where the investment delivers success, which enables yet more investment, which delivers yet more success. We like that cycle, and we think our gamers like that cycle. In terms of putting our own games into this service, or any of our services, upon their release, As you well know, this is not a road that we've gone down in the past, and it's not a road that we're going to go down with this new service. We feel if we were to do that with the games that we make at PlayStation Studios, that virtuous cycle will be broken. The level of investment that we need to make in our studios would not be possible, and we think the knock-on effect on the quality of the games that we make would not be something that gamers want.
Now, that is a very interesting comment, I think, and will sort of frame a lot of the discussion that we're going to have about Xbox and PlayStation going forward. But we're just going to put a pin in that just now, because we are going to come back to Jim Ryan's comments in our topic of the week at the end of the show, where we will be talking about it more in detail. However, another couple of little tidbits have come out about Games Pass recently. Firstly, the monetary numbers around Games Pass have always been very tightly held by Xbox, which makes David Gibson's statement so interesting. But Xbox have said that they have paid out $2.5 billion in royalties to partners of their ID at Xbox program, which is their indie program for those that don't know. They have also said that the total revenue generated by ID at Xbox partners on Xbox almost doubled in the past 3 years, which is obviously fantastic for indie devs who are involved in the program. They did also say that they have paid hundreds of millions of dollars on Games Pass licensing fees, which presumably is what that $10 to $15 million David Gibson was talking about, like it would contribute to that. At GDC as well, they also announced ID at Azure, a program which aims to help indie devs create cloud-based games. While also at GDC, Phil Spencer also emphasised he doesn't believe that a game needs to be released on Games Pass in order to have success on an Xbox. Which is probably strictly true, but it does ring a little hollow in the face of all the marketing we've been bombarded with around Games Pass over the past few years, Liz. So, as I said, we're going to be digging into Jim Ryan's comments a wee bit later in our topic of the week, but keeping it focused on Xbox and Games Pass for now. The comments made by Jim Ryan and by David Gibson have outright said, or hinted at the very least, that putting games on a subscription service day one would not be good for studios, basically, and would not be good for the quality of their games. So then surely that same logic can then be applied to Xbox and Games Pass, even though it does seem, at least on the outside, that Games Pass has been working wonders for indie games. Higher up the totem, do you know what I mean, when we're getting to AAA levels, surely the same logic applies. Like I was saying, like surely the same problems should be being experienced by Xbox, and maybe some of the rumblings at Xbox Studios, specifically thinking about the news that we reported on last week at the initiative, are they springing up from this? I don't know, this is entirely speculation, but it's interesting to think about, I think.
I definitely agree that it's interesting. I mean, I've long been fascinated by how Xbox Game Pass works, who's making money out of it, how can it be sustainable, and in this big rush towards our, you know, all streaming, all subscriptions future, someone is going to lose out within that, I've always felt, or there's a potential that people could. So it is really interesting to see these kinds of thoughts and these kind of numbers come out. But I don't know what to make of it, because I do wonder, you know, for example, the point about making investments, well, if Halo doesn't appear on Xbox Game Pass, has Xbox made anything like the money that it has over the past couple of years, and that it is then funneled into the development of Halo without that, you know? So it's a little bit chicken and egg in some ways. It's sort of what comes first. Do you need to put the huge games on your subscription service to get even more money through your subscription service to then invest in the games? Or I guess the inverse question we could really ask about all of this is, would Xbox Game Pass have anything like the numbers that it currently has if Xbox's first party games weren't coming day and date? That's a question obviously that we can't answer. It's obviously also a question that's quite difficult, because really Halo and Forza have been the only massive releases on that platform that have come directly from Xbox. You know, in 5 years' time, if the Bethesda games that are in the pipeline start coming, I don't know, maybe this is an entirely different picture again. But yeah, a fascinating sort of set of questions there.
Yeah, definitely. I'm also fascinated by David Gibson's comment that at retail price or whatever it was, the amount of money that they were getting from Games Pass equated to like $2 a game or something like that. Which, as he pointed out, although is 100% profit basically, does seem very, very low for a licensed Marvel game, if I'm totally honest.
It does.
It just makes you wonder about sustainability, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's really where I'm coming from here, I suppose.
Absolutely. I mean, and that is the question for big studios and small studios, because even for indies, you know, getting numbers to play your game is one thing, but if it still costs you a lot of time and energy to do that, and Xbox don't pay you tons, again, I don't even know if we really have a great understanding of, you know, was that $5 to $10 million paid to Square up front, and then there will be royalties based on how many plays they get or not? Like, we literally just don't know some of that stuff. I guess the flip side even of that $2 number is that to get $10 million from retail sales at about $30, you're going to have to sell, I don't know, something in the region of like 350,000 copies, and that's not even all profit rates. You're going to have to spend on marketing, you're going to have to spend on distribution. So like, it's such a complex web of sums that have to be done.
It's massively complex. Yeah.
And so I just really hope that some great investigative journalist out there can really dig into all this at some point and answer that question that you're posing there, Mark, about sustainability. Like, are these subscription services great for consumers because we get hundreds of games at, you know, relatively little cost, but will in 10 years time we all be kicking ourselves that we completely fucked the industry?
Well, yes, this is exactly the problem. Alright, Lewis, news item number 3, and sticking with subscription services, Rockstar have also introduced a paid subscription service to GTA Online called GTA Plus, and absolutely no one is happy about it, Lewis. Rockstar recently released the next-gen versions of GTA 5, which caused a nearly 9-year-old game, Lewis, to once again top the UK sales charts, which is just absolutely insane, considering it knocked off Elden Ring. I mean, it's absolutely unstoppable, this game. The legs on it are unreal. However, they waited a few weeks after the next-gen launch to announce the new subscription service, which I think tells you that they knew exactly how badly this was going to go down. Basically, members will gain access to a new set of exclusive rewards each month and special GTA Plus shark cards, which is basically the in-game currency, which offer bonus cash. I think also as well you get additional XP and cash from like in-game missions and events and things like that. You also get increased in-game discounts. It is also only available on the PS5 and the Series X and S. So if you have a last-gen console or a PC, well, no luck to you, unfortunately. The general sentiment seems to be that this edition is both greedy and pointless, which is a bad combination, Lewis. Greedy because they have essentially locked exclusive rewards behind a subscription-based paywall, which is well and truly really squeezing every single penny that is physically possible to get out of GTA 5, I think. And to be fair, if I was a hardcore gamer who had conceivably been playing this game for potentially 9 years or coming on 9 years, and then Rockstar made a change and suddenly introduced this subscription service and blocked off content that I no longer have access to, like, I would be annoyed about that. I can see why people are annoyed about that, you know? But it's also pointless because ostensibly this is there to give new players a jump start effectively and a reason to buy the game on next-gen consoles. But they already have something called Career Builder, which gives new players a better kickstart than GTA Plus does. And the barrier to entry to get the game on a next-gen system has also massively been reduced. The discounts on both consoles to get GTA 5 is ridiculous, and GTA Online in itself is currently even free on PlayStation Plus right now. So they've solved both these problems already, do you know what I mean? I also think that it is a pretty shit move, really, to change how your game operates in such a massive capacity when you have such an enormous fan base after 9 years. You know what I mean? I just think that that's a really shitty thing to do. And also, I think that most people just think that the rewards are not worth $6 a month, which is how much it costs, which is nearly $72 a year, and is basically equivalent to buying the game retail twice per year. And for what? A wee bit of extra cash that doesn't seem to make a huge amount of difference in the economy of the game, and some exclusive rewards. It doesn't seem to make any sense at all. This just seems to be a bad idea through and through.
Yeah, I would pretty much agree with that, to be honest. It seems a little grubby and, like you say, a bit strange to just drop this in 9 years later. You know, that they didn't think of this when it launched on the last gen consoles even. And even the idea that it's there to in any way support new players, I just think is kind of farcical, because like, why would a new player immediately pay a subscription service if they haven't played the game yet? They don't even know if they like it. It doesn't hold water to me. It feels very much like they understand that the cycle of this game must surely be coming towards its end. It's obviously not quite there yet, but this is a way to kind of squeeze a bit of last cash out of it.
I mean, it's definitely that. It's definitely that. We know GTA 6 is on the way, it's in development, but fucking hell, man, they really are clutching every single penny that they can possibly get out of this game. It's absolutely unreal, man. Alright, let's news item number 4. Journalist Jeff Grubb has said that EA has greenlit a rebranding of the FIFA franchise to EA Sports Football Club, which is not a good name, but that's by the by. You may remember back in October last year, it was revealed that EA were, quote-unquote, exploring the idea of renaming the FIFA franchise. This would also coincide with the end of EA's license with FIFA, which expires after the Qatar World Cup later this year. Apparently FIFA wanted $2.5 billion for their license over the next decade, which was more than double their previous fee, something that EA was not willing to pay. And basically EA think that they do not need the FIFA name to be successful in this industry, and that is according to EA CEO Andrew Wilson. Wilson also claimed that FIFA had been an impediment on EA's ambitions for the series, apparently stopping them from providing changes fans wanted, and he's gone so far as to say that FIFA is just the name on the box, quotes. It does seem as though the next game that will be released will be FIFA 23 and will be made by EA, but it is likely the last one that will be made by EA. So, FIFA, obviously being one of the biggest and most successful video game series in the world, and in fact it was also revealed this week that it is the most played series in the UK, beating out Mario and COD. Therefore, I think that this is actually like quite a big deal, because one, it allows EA to make the game that they actually want to make, assuming that they do want to make the changes that the fans have requested, and two, because it means that the FIFA license is now up for grabs, which means that for the first time since the heyday of Pro Evolution Soccer, Lewis, there might actually be some competition in the football sim space, you know? Lewis, you're a much bigger football fan than me. You used to like and play a hell of a lot of FIFA and Pro Ev back in the day. What are your thoughts here? Do you have any excitement for this at all?
Excitement, maybe not quite the right word. I'm interested in all of this. It's the end of an era, let's say that first of all. You know, this is a major change in the gaming landscape. Huge, and in the sports game landscape. And I think, I would take with a huge pinch of salt EA's assertion that FIFA have stopped them doing anything that the players want, because you know, EA are very good at not doing things that players want, and in fact doing stuff that players really don't want with their games. So I don't imagine that an EA Sports, what did you call it, EA Sports Football Club game?
Indeed.
I don't think that that's going to be substantially different in its approach to the existing FIFA games, but maybe there can be some changes there. And I really like your point, and it's not one I had thought much about, but that the release of that license might allow another company to take it on and use. I mean, I think I do agree with EA that it is just the name in the box, right? And it will only be the name on the box for 2K or whatever as well, but they at least can use that as a springboard to build something that could be decent enough. The fear for me in some ways is that sports games are sports games, and it will probably be 2K or something similar that it goes to, and so we'll just get a kind of similarly predatory game that isn't, you know, all that great altogether. But yeah, when this first broke months and months and months ago, I thought it would never happen. I thought it was brinksmanship from EA, but here we are. It does seem to be coming to an end, and how ironic that, given that it's all about money, the deal will end right after FIFA's Qatar World Cup, which is also all about FIFA's insane greed. So, you know, perfect timing.
Very good. I'm glad that you brought up 2K, because in my eyes they are the only people that are going to pick up this license.
It will be. And it will be going to be anyone does, yeah.
FIFA 2K24, and that name on the box will sell a hell of a lot of copies of that game, I can assure you.
Yep.
Also, I genuinely think it's good that they have competition as well. These games have become so stagnant in the last 5 to 10 years. Hopefully this drives some innovation as well.
Yeah.
Alright, let's finish off as we always do with a couple of shout outs. Shout out number 1, Kirby and the Forgotten Land has come out this week, and it is reviewed really well. It is currently sitting with a very nice 85 on Metacritic, and in much the same way as Mario Odyssey, The game just seems to be a damn good time, Liz. It seems to be really fun to play. It's an absolute joy. A lot of reviewers have specifically said it is a great place to jump into the series if you're not familiar with the franchise massively. And fans have also said that from this entry they are very excited about the direction that the game is taking, which is really, really great to hear. I also usually don't pay a great deal of attention to user review scores, if I'm totally honest with you. But the user review scores for this game are an 89, which is extremely impressive and actually higher than the critic scores, which is quite unusual, I have to say. The only real complaint that I've seen is that the game is pretty easy and pretty straightforward, but at the same time, like, it's not fucking Dark Souls, do you know what I mean? Like, it's ostensibly a kid's game here, you know? You sort of know what you're letting yourself in for. Oh, Souls Kirby, I'd be well up for that, man. Lewis, as a man who loved Mario Odyssey and who got himself very, very excited for Luigi's Mansion 3, you have shown a surprising lack of interest in this game, I have to say. I genuinely thought this would be right up your street. I'm more interested in it than you, I think.
I mean, I think that's true and it's not true. It's like, I thought that their launch trailer was really fun and quite exciting, and I'm really glad for the team and for the fans that it's turned out this well and that it could be a springboard for future stuff. That's great, and that is really all you can hope for, and it's great that it's getting the reviews it's got. It's actually selling really well as well, I think, particularly in the UK.
Smashing
but it's just Kirby himself, herself, itself, I'm not actually sure. I just can't get excited about it. Like with Mario Odyssey, it was like, it's Mario and I know what that kind of means, and I just look at Kirby and think, like, you're kind of just this thing that was in Smash, and I know that you're kind of important, but it's just not really on my radar. So
you don't have the same relationship
exactly,
to
but don't get me wrong, like, maybe I will pick this up at some point. I would, it's the kind of game that I would love to play a decent demo of, and I believe there is a demo of this, so I might go and pick that up. I think someone on our Twitter said that the demo was really fun, so I might check it out and maybe I'll be convinced.
Nice one, man. Alright, let's shout out number 2. Also out this week is Tiny Tina's Wonderland. It's currently sitting with an 80 on PC. The game is also available for Xbox and PS5, but neither have enough reviews to aggregate a score, which is kind of weird, but I guess just how the vehicles worked out. 80 is by no means a bad score, but I do think the Gearbox were probably aiming for higher than that. The gameplay, the writing, the performances, the insane number of crazy guns and loot all seem to be of the caliber you would expect from a Borderlands game, but at the same time, I do think that is the issue, and that it is hamstrung a little bit by being a Borderlands game. It seems as though they had a real opportunity to make something really cool and maybe really lean into the D&D side of things here, but instead they've basically just made fantasy Borderlands, which is no bad thing, but is also not that interesting, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. That was my fear about it from the moment we first saw it. It's just going to be a reskinned Borderlands. Feels like that series could use a bit of a fresh injection. But, 80 is not a bad score. I'm sure people who are just looking for another Borderlands set will be kind of fine with that, so fair enough. All right, shout out number 3. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League has been delayed until spring 2023 to the surprise of absolutely no one, Lewis. Particularly because Gotham Knights is still apparently coming out on October the 25th this year, and Hogwarts Legacy is also due out in Q4 this year. So releasing 2 games in the same quarter of a year is strange in and of itself, but releasing 3 would be utter madness. Side note, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Hogwarts Legacy got pushed to 2023 as well, maybe early, but there you go. They have basically said that the reason for the delay is simply because they need more time to make the best game that they can, and fair play to them. As ever, take the time that you need to make the best game that you can and avoid crunch. That's all you can ask for your devs, I really think. Both Suicide Squad and Gotham were both announced in August 2020, which isn't as long ago as I thought that it would be, and I think that the reason that it feels as though these games were announced longer ago is because Warner Brothers keep on implying that these games are on the cusp of release, or at least that's how I'm taking it. And then they get a huge delay, then the other one's delayed, then the other game's delayed again, and they've totally ruined their pre-release hype cycle here, and it's just been totally mishandled and just marred by these delays again and again and again. Basically, I just think these games were announced too early. Like, take your time and announce them when they're in a position to get us excited about it, which I thought that they were, but I don't know, it seems as though all the gameplay that we got from all the stuff that we've seen from this is just one vertical slice, and the game seems to be still a ways away, Yeah, still a wee bit off. I mean, I guess in the case of Kill the Justice League in particular, there has been a lot of fan pressure on Rocksteady to tell us what they've been working on, so I would caveat it with that. And obviously, the game needs more time. I definitely think it looks like it needs more time from what we've seen, so give it to it. But yeah, I agree. The marketing cycle and the hype cycle on this one in particular, and on Gotham Knights to a certain extent, has not done it massive favours, I don't think. I really hope that they come back later in the year, blow us away with something fresh.
Yeah, totally, man. That'd be great. All right, shout out number 4. It has also been announced earlier today, in fact, as we record this, that Breath of the Wild 2 has been delayed until spring 2023. Nintendo have made a very typically Nintendo apology video on YouTube, which I always think is quite nice, but I don't know if it's just my Western sensibilities, but it always seems a little bit over the top, It always makes you feel as if they're apologising for, like, murdering your pet or something. Even more so than the Suicide Squad, I very much hope that they just take the time to make the best game that they can. I am so excited for Breath of the Wild 2 and just want it to be the best game that it possibly can be. Honestly, this delay also was not a surprise to me in the slightest. To me, spring 2023 makes a lot more sense, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it was pushed again until Q4 2023.
No, and push it as long as it needs to be, the sequel to perhaps the best game ever made. Like, don't rush this, just get it right, and that's absolutely fine. It does probably mean that Elden Ring is going to be Game of the Year after all this contentious discussions.
Oh, sure.
I guess
I don't really think there was much challengers there, was there really?
All eyes are on God of War Ragnarok now. I saw just actually about 15 minutes ago that their Sony Santa Monica's community manager has tweeted tonight saying that God of War is still coming in 2022, so who knows? We'll see, but yeah, it's a shame for this massive year of releases that we were looking at that Breath of the Wild slipped, but not a surprise in the least.
No, definitely not. Alright, and final shout out number 5. The games industry has continued to make significant donations to charities helping with the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, which is just unbelievably fantastic to see. Most notably, the Humble Bundle that we mentioned last week has ended after raising $20.7 million, which is just an insane amount of money. And Epic and Xbox have announced that they will be donating all their net proceeds from Fortnite from March the 20th to April the 3rd to humanitarian charities in Ukraine. And as of the 25th of March, they have already raised $70 million. So by the time April the 3rd rolls round, that could be a truly insane amount of money. It's just fantastic. It's just great to see the games industry step up and organise things like this. It is still a very, very scary time in Ukraine. And I'd encourage everyone who can to donate or help in any way that you can. Video games or otherwise, just video games is a good way to do it. If you buy some video games, then you help a bunch of people in need and you get a bunch of games. Win-win, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Great to see continued support for the people of Ukraine through gaming. Some astronomical sums raised, which is, again, we've said it a million times, but for the bad rap that the gaming community can often get, and rightfully often gets, it can also do some pretty incredible stuff. So, well done to everyone who has bought these bundles and donated and blah, 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 paid for Fortnite stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, man. All right, Liz, I think it's time for a beer, and then we'll be back for Topic of the Week. And we are back for Topic of the Week. Topic of the Week this week is releasing games day one on PS Plus and Games Pass. Bad for gaming, Lewis. We said we would come back around to Jim Ryan's comments, and here we stand.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this is obviously one of the key bits of the whole discussion around the PS Plus news today. The debate about whether or not PlayStation is kind of in the right or in the wrong to hold back day one releases of their first party games, or maybe even just exclusives generally from day one. Like, should they be putting them out on day one the way that Xbox does? And Jim Ryan's comments obviously circle around this idea that to do that would reduce their ability to invest in games, i.e. make games not as good as they currently do, which gamers wouldn't want. And that sounds like a valid enough argument, but I think it deserves some pulling apart, because as we were talking about a wee bit earlier around Xbox, I don't know if we can definitively say that we've seen a drop in quality in terms of Xbox's first party titles as a result of the Game Pass day one model.
No, in fact, I would argue, Lewis, that Halo Infinite, Forza Horizon 5 and arguably Microsoft Flight Simulator are some of the most impressive games, maybe not creatively, but technically, that Xbox have ever made.
Yeah, I think that they absolutely are. And, you know, it's fair enough to say that obviously Xbox's games just haven't been as good as PlayStation's for a while now. But that doesn't mean to say that the subscription model or the day one element of the subscription model has actually hurt their games. And so, I don't know, I listened to what Jim Ryan said about that, and I think two things. One, I think they just don't want to do that potentially because it might hurt sales, and that's a good revenue stream, and they are guaranteed millions of dollars of sales for most of their major first party games, no doubt about it. And also, two, can Sony actually take the hit that is required to do that in the way that Microsoft can? I think that in reality that's kind of what underpins that, because we have all this information as well from the Xbox side about the additional spend that people who are Game Pass subscribers make on the games that they play on Game Pass, and even the knock-on effect of sales of games that are on Game Pass from non-subscribers. That all sounds a bit technical, but what I think that points to is that there's an argument that actually having your best games leading your subscription model would rise the tide generally across the board. And I have concerns, and I'll come back to them in a second, about not having them there and actually that reducing the income of the company a wee bit. How genuine has Jim Ryan been here? Do you think that actually God of War Ragnarok would be worse if God of War 2018 had come out day and date on a subscription service?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure that we're really talking about that sort of time frame. Really.
No,
I think what we're talking about
yeah.
is many years down the line.
Yeah.
Like if we start subscription services now, in 10 years' time, is the quality of our game going to be worse? And the answer to that question is I don't know. However, Jim Ryan has access to a lot more information about stuff like that than I will ever. So maybe it's true. I don't know. Is he just saying this because he doesn't want to put PlayStation first party games on his subscription service? Very possibly also. What I wouldn't rule out is both of these things being true. Like PlayStation have always said basically from the get-go that they didn't think that Games Pass, the model of Games Pass, was a sustainable model. And I think a lot of that came down to the revenue that was lost by putting day one games onto that subscription service, you know? So PlayStation have been saying this for a long time. So this isn't like new information. This isn't a sudden change in their position. Do you know what I mean? Which, I don't know, maybe they could just be holding on to it for dear life, but it feels as though they genuinely think that day one releases in a Games Pass style model isn't sustainable. And considering the comments that we heard earlier from David Gibson about how equivalently people were paying like $2 for Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy. Again, that's a Marvel licensed game. That should never really be that cheap. Do you know what I mean? There's no world in which we should reasonably expect that game to be that cheap. Do you know what I mean? So it's things like that that sort of worry me. Look, the finances of all this have been kept so close to the chest that we just do not know how it's helping or how it's hurting developers. Do you know what I mean? From the indie perspective, it seems to be working great for those guys, and that's fantastic. Like, the numbers that Xbox are giving out with regards to them are really, really encouraging and really super good to see. However, is when you get up that totem pole, like we were saying, when you're talking about AAA games with AAA budgets that have to be recouped in game sales, you know, how much is it hurting them? Like, how much is it hurting the really, really high end? And I really don't think anyone has a very good answer to that yet. Do you know what I mean? Don't get me wrong, I think Games Pass is obviously ridiculously consumer friendly. Yeah. It's the best deal in video games. We all keep on going on about it and saying that. But is this ultimately going to hurt our industry long term? I don't know, but it's something that we should be considering. Yeah, is all I'm saying.
No, I definitely agree with that, and I've generally taken the cautious side and thought, yeah,
no, you have, Liz. To be fair, you've been on this point way longer than I have. It's only in the last couple of months that a few pieces of evidence have come out, and I was like, maybe this is a long term problem potentially. Yeah. But yeah, you've been on this since day one. I've got to say, yeah, always been complaining about Games Pass. That's your stance. Is like,
always follow the money, as the Wire said. You know, you've got to see what's happening behind the scenes to really understand it. But I think, to me, the kind of flip side question in one sense is that, you know, if all of PlayStation's money is there to be divided up between its games, and so selling, you know, tens of millions of copies of God of War fills their coffers and they get to reinvest that in the next God of War or the next Ghost of Tsushima or whatever it might be. I just wonder whether having those games day and date on subscription services would massively drive the revenue in that side in such a way that it would offset it. And I worry, I think I kind of hinted at this earlier, but I worry a little bit that that people might actually buy less PlayStation exclusives day and date going forward because they expect that if they just wait 4 or 5 months, they'll then get them quote unquote free on their subscription service. But you've lost the ability to turn 45 million PlayStation Plus subscribers into 70 million by saying The Last of Us will appear on this day and date, you know? So I'm thinking again about, like, remember when they had that kind of moment where they celebrated Ghost of Tsushima getting to like 8 million sales? Well, the money that 8 million sales at kind of retail price would generate, I think, and I haven't done the sums, but I think would be dwarfed if you got your subscription numbers up enough on the back of something like that being on it, you know, and then your player base goes up.
But it's not just that, though. It's not just your subscription numbers times the price of that subscription, you know. It's your subscription numbers times the price of that subscription minus what they were already paying for in PS Plus, which actually is quite a small amount of money. Do you know what I mean? That's what money they'd be making on top of you having just the entry level PS Plus subscription, which a lot of people have, and then that small proportion of it has to be justifiably used to cost for all the games on the service.
Yeah.
Like, don't get me wrong, like, I'm sure that there's some very high level sums going on here, right? which we will never be privy to. It will never be known to us exactly what they are, but I have to think that both of these companies, Sony and Microsoft, have done their sums well. And for Sony, they think that putting them on day one is bad and is sustainable for them in the long term. But however, on the Microsoft side, as you said, maybe because they do have more money in the coffers, more money there to secure their position if anything should go wrong, maybe they can take a knock in the short term to get 25 million people signed up to Games Pass, you know?
Yeah, you know, you make a good point there as well. It almost depends what third-party games are in those libraries, because Microsoft can afford to pay loads of money to third parties, but they've also bought a huge number of the third parties.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
And that changes the sum. You know, if this subscription service from PlayStation was more like, well, sort of more like the Nintendo Switch Online service in that it was only PlayStation games that were on it, then the numbers would look completely different again, right? Because they wouldn't be paying out revenue to other publishers or other developers necessarily. So yeah, there's complications even within that, which I hadn't been considering enough, to be totally honest. But I don't know, it is interesting that these two companies, like you say, have done their sums and presumably done them 500 times with some of the best business mathematicians in the game and found kind of different answers. They've gone down different routes.
Well, you need to remember, Xbox had to do it to catch up to the level that PlayStation was at, and now
it's a lost leader,
basically
really,
there. But PlayStation don't need to do that. They don't need to shift the tide in such a way. They just have to keep it flowing in their direction, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. That is, for PlayStation, it's about keeping the people that they've already got, because there are something like 45 million PlayStation Plus subscribers, and using these new tiers, I guess, and the added value that way to grow it without having to guarantee day and date releases. I think as well, the one other major difference between the two companies and their approaches is that actually Xbox tends to produce games, or has at least recently tended to produce games, that having more players is more important to the finances than selling a lot of copies in some senses, right? You need millions of players for service games like Halo Infinite or like Forza Horizon 5 in order to keep generating money. And they have again said before that people playing on Game Pass tend to spend more on in-game purchases than other people do. And so the flip side of that is that that's not really what PlayStation have been doing up till now. And they might be looking at it going, well, if we just give away essentially a free copy of God of War Ragnarok, we won't ever make any money on that individual copy because it's not that type of game. And so that leads me on to maybe one final question, which is just, Jim Ryan is saying categorically here that their first party games will not be coming to this service day and date. Do you think that applies to PlayStation's very apparent new strategy around multiplayer games? Because they are building, you know, they've bought Bungie, they've bought Haven. They are obviously looking to make multiplayer games in the future and big live service games. And in reality, putting them on a subscription service on day one makes fucking total sense. So is he going to backtrack on this?
agreed. Well, if you read the article at gamesindustry.biz, links as always over on the show notes at PlayersToo.com, he does leave the door open to change things.
Of course he does.
Of course he does, because he's a CEO and that's what they all do. Honestly, I think that would be an enormous mistake if they didn't use that platform for things like that, because that is where these platforms thrive, I think, anyway. In the indie scene and in the live service scene, I think subscription services like this really matter. I mean, when a game like Fall Guys was given away for free on the regular PlayStation Plus subscription as one of your free games for the month, I mean, that game took off in a way that it definitely wouldn't have. I mean, well, I believe that it definitely wouldn't have.
Well, we've seen it collapse basically since
standard release. Well, yeah, unfortunately it's lost its popularity, but I mean, to have had that moment in the sun in the way that it did, it will always have a certain number of fans, and it will definitely have made its money back, and those devs will be able to go on and make Fall Guys 2 or something else now. Do you know what I mean? That's what it's all about. I mean, live service games don't need to last until the heat death of the universe. Do you know what I mean? Like,
although they all promise they will.
yeah. I mean, they can all just have like a good innings. Do you know what I mean? I feel as though Fall Guys really had that. Not everything has to turn into fucking Rocket League or something like that. Do you know what I mean? Which just goes and goes and goes and goes and goes. I think that would be a mistake if they didn't do that. Yeah, whatever Haven's working on, whatever Bungie's going to release for them, Deviation Games I think is making them a multiplayer as well. They said that they were going to release some ridiculous number of live service games in the next 5 years.
Yeah, it was like 25 like in the next 5 or 6 years or something.
It was nonsense. It was absolutely nonsense number. Yeah, if they're not on this service day one, I think that would be a mistake, and I think that might be a turning point for them. Yeah. However, those big games, Last of Us, God of War, Spider-Man, Wolverine, the next Ratchet and Clank, things like that, I think that they remain off the service day one. Yeah,
and then just a sort of window of time later, they will be added.
Agreed. Maybe, I don't know, between 6 months and a year later, they appear there. That's the sort of time frame I'm working with anyway.
And hopefully we'll get discounts at least on those releases on day one if we are like the top tier PS Plus subscribers. You know, that kind of thing could balance this out a wee bit, you know.
Yeah, beats paying 70 quid for a game list. Well, I have to say, I highly, highly doubt this will be the last time that we're talking about this. In fact, I highly suspect it will be going on for years.
Yeah. Probably every week until June there'll be some debate about this going on in the corners of the internet. So,
absolutely, definitely. But I'm excited for this. I do think that it's a good thing that PlayStation are doing. Is it quite as good a deal as Xbox are offering with Games Pass? No. Is it still a good deal? Yes. That is my basic opinion on it.
Yeah, similarly excited. Really keen to see what comes from the library of games part in particular. That's what will decide for me which tier I'm coming in at. But
absolutely,
I'm glad we've got to this point at least.
Yeah, definitely. Jesus, it's been a long road. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll have to call it a day there. I'd like to remind everyone that you can find PlayersToo on all the social media. That is Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PlayerSToo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, that really, really, really helps us out. It does a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And while you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, again, that just helps us out even more. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. You're an absolute legend to us. I'd like to remind everyone that our play-along game for this month is The Pathless, which I have turned on, barely started to play, then got waylaid by something else, and I was quite annoyed about it. But I'm very excited to actually get stuck into it, Lewis, because the first thing that struck me was, man, does this game look good. Yeah. Like, the art style is fantastic. I absolutely love it. Very, very much looking forward to playing it.
Yeah, a very beautiful world to spend some time in. I'm looking forward to hearing what you think about it and chatting about it next week.
Nice one, man. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will see you next week.
Thanks.